Well, welcome to the Go Your Way podcast. I'm Greg Knieriemen, once again joined by Phoebe Goh. And our very special guest this week is Brian Gracely, Director of Product Strategy at Red Hat. And Brian, you have the distinction now of not only being our first guest on the podcast, you're now our first repeat offender. So welcome back.
That's great. Hey, Phoebe and Greg, good to be back on. I hopefully I didn't blow it up too much. You guys invited me back, so good to be back with you.
No.
Welcome back.
It was fantastic. And Brian, we're coming off the back here of Red Hat Summit, which was kind of an industry first for a large-scale, full-blown conversion from a physical summit to a virtual summit. And I hope you recovered. You look good.
Well, thanks. I think I'm a little scraggly. I haven't had a haircut in about 3 months. So, but yeah, no, it was. So just to, I guess, to put it in perspective, we were probably the first large tech company to not cancel the event and try and do it all virtual. In terms of like scale, so normally Red Hat Summit would get 10, 12, 15,000 people. I think we had 80,000 people register, and I think we had about 45,000 people watching the keynote. So,
wow.
There's something to be said for doing it virtual and not making people travel. It was an interesting experience for 3 days.
Phoebe, I think Brian set the bar for us. And we got to keep those metrics off the table. We're going to get beat over the head with them now.
Oh, yeah. And for you, Brian, I mean, I guess it would have been a slightly different experience to what you would have in the in-person event.
Yeah, well, I mean, normally I spend almost. I mean, you guys have been to the events at the big conference center, so you get done at the end of the day and you've walked like 11 miles and your voice is hoarse. I didn't necessarily walk any miles. I probably sat in this chair for the whole time. The one thing that was different was because it was virtual, we decided to do some unique things. We catered it kind of to the regions where people were coming from, which was great for them. For me, it meant basically 48 hours of being straight, talking to Asia and Europe and North America and then back to Asia. And it was cool. It was very, very different. And we knew it wasn't going to be perfect and it had some flaws and things that we learned, but it was good to be able to connect with our customers and not sort of skip a year. So that was important to us.
It was great. And I joined in, I watched some of the activities, and it was a unique virtual experience. In the extent, I think it was as well managed as you could from a virtual experience perspective. And so I enjoyed it for the few sessions that I saw, but it also brings up kind of a challenge, and not just from an event perspective. I'm thinking about this whole new work from home experience that we're all dealing with, and thinking about how different organizations adapted to it. Brian, you talk about the Red Hat Summit and how you've adapted to it, how it changed your schedule, it changed your routine a little bit. What does this mean in the context of how, let's say, application developers or cloud operations managers are now dealing with remote work? Because I think it's a unique challenge in those environments to where that collaboration in the office, in the data center makes a difference.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of big things that people are trying to figure out. So I think when we got started with this, let's say it was in the 1st of May or 1st of March, whenever you started, people threw out a date and they said, okay, by end of March, it'll be done, or April 15th, it'll be done. I think now people are really kind of coming around to this idea that, not that this will never end, but some of the ramifications may go on for a long period of time, right? You may not travel, you may not go into the office, with full office. And so it's making people really think like, okay, what of these things might become semi-permanent or permanent, just in terms of, beyond Zoom meetings or collaboration, other stuff. I'll give you one example that we've been working on for a little bit. It got some news because GitHub did some things. So there's been this thing for a long time, and you both have been around like the VDI world for a while, where it was like, okay, managing desktops for everyday workers is there's a trade-off between what you customize and how much is difficult to manage. The same concept goes on with application developers. So, if you're an application developer, you get a brand new laptop, it's not unusual for you to spend a week, 10 days, 2 weeks kind of customizing it, getting all the tools you like, getting the right background colors, all that stuff. That's a lot of money that the company spends that they get no productivity out of. And so there's been this trend of, I don't want to call it VDI for developers, but it's essentially like what they call web IDE for developers. And there's people are really starting to look at that as, will that become a more common thing than because of there's some technical nuances that make it sometimes hard for them to work remotely over VPNs and other stuff.
Yeah, I am all for that, by the way. I think, as a part-time coder, having my profile, having my extensions, my shortcuts, my aliases easy at hand. I mean, it's a good point that for businesses that's lost productivity while a developer's not doing something. But on the other hand, if they don't do it, get it all set up their way, they're going to be even less productive. So right. I am 100% behind that. Yeah, I love the idea.
It's kind of the classic example of, in a perfect world, you do things however you want to, right? We kind of got used to that. Now we're living in a world where we're having to go, okay, maybe I don't want to do certain things, but if that's the only way I can do it, right? Or that's becomes the new productive way to do it, then people start adjusting what their expectations are. So that's going to be kind of an interesting thing to watch is, where do expectations change a little bit?
I absolutely think Kubernetes is a perfect, big industry-changing example of that. Whether or not containers are your preferred way of operating and building applications, I feel like it's kind of that we've got to do it.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting to look at this too for how not just the tools that developers and operators are leveraging, but how their priorities have changed as far as which applications they're working on. Brian, have you seen any distinctions with the customers and developers you're working with as far as how the priorities of the projects they're working on has changed through this?
Yeah, I've seen sort of two things, and it doesn't, now that I look at it, it doesn't seem that unusual. Usually you've got this spectrum, some are working on new stuff. There's a lot of stuff in the sort of 80% middle maintenance, a little bit of projects, and then some legacy. We sort of, the people that I'm talking to tend to fall into two real distinct camps. There's the ones who are kind of locking everything down. Everything is, unless it's totally mission critical, we're not touching it, we're not changing it, we're not investing in anything. And then there's a distinct set of companies who sort of look at this space and they go, we are going to use it as an opportunity, right? They're not, it's not opportunistic in some, unethical way, but they're saying, look, this is going to be so for example, let's say you are in, I don't know, grocery stores or you're in food, right? Like you're distinctly saying, look, our world may be that people don't come into our physical place anymore. So what does that mean in terms of like curbside pickup? Like we're all dealing with that. Like, what is that going to mean? Does that mean something different in terms of our mobile app? Does it mean something different in terms of personalization? And so we're sort of seeing those two camps, the ones who are like, lock it all down. And then we're seeing the ones who kind of are visionary and saying, this is going to give us a chance to kind of pull away from things because the world's going to be different. We have some expertise in doing that. But yeah, it's kind of the middle is kind of gone away. You're either on one end of the spectrum or the other.
One of the key trends that I've seen is exactly to your point, Brian. Certain projects that were kind of put in the back burner now, kind of elevating to priority projects. I don't know if logistics has ever become sexier than it is now. And,
oh yeah.
And the application development efforts that are going into it, to where in some scenarios with some companies it was kind of a second tier project, but also looking ahead here and the trends now. And this has been widely talked about, and I don't want to beat it to death, but the idea that now people are used to working remote, the footprint for corporate offices and corporate space is probably going to not be at the premium that it once was. And as we learn how to work from home, it's going to be interesting to see how employers, tech companies in particular, adapt to this. And as there's a number of companies, we know them all, that are very focused on geographic location
right.
for the hires they make. This has kind of, I think, opened up some territory here to where you can get a lot more geographic diversity from your candidate pools now, particularly from an application developer perspective, where a lot of people look. I don't want to get stereotypical here, but we all have friends in the industry that like living in remote Oregon, and they're not moving to Silicon Valley for no reason at all. And now that universe is completely changed, and it's changed companies. I can imagine, and we haven't heard any plans here at NetApp, but I can see a scenario where the footprint gets reduced, the physical footprint in the offices. And I think every CFO is looking at those implications now and seeing where the cost advantages are to not being so geographic centric.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit on a couple of things. One is we had a long period of time where you could kind of work anywhere you wanted to. VPNs and Wi-Fi made stuff possible. Like you said, we went back over the last 5-6 years where being in 3 or 4 locations, it was sort of Boston, the Valley, Seattle, maybe it was Austin, were kind of the hub spots. Everything else was like, you're a second-class citizen. Yeah,
or if you're in Cleveland, a third-class citizen. But go on.
Right, exactly. But so it's bringing that conversation back. And then the other thing is, I mean, you could look at my background a little bit. You look at your own backgrounds. Like everybody has spent a couple of hours now making yourself look professional because you're realizing like this may not be a couple of month thing. Like this might be the thing I do on a regular basis. How do I make myself representative of that? And I think it's becoming more common. And I think just like when we saw the tech bubble burst and then we saw this explosion of new stuff come out, I think we're going to find a bunch of new things kind of spin out of this as well. And it'll be interesting like you can kind of start imagining what, the next collaboration thing looks like or the next tech event. I mean, shoot, if you're in the tech event thing, and you could do it 10 times better than we did at Red Hat Summit, like that would be fantastic. I mean, there's going to be a lot of interesting innovation that comes out of this thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think I saw an article where Twitter has actually said, when we go back to work, whenever this goes back to work, we're all going to be working remote unless there's, a server or something that you actually need to physically attend to. So I think that the norms are going to shift. And I think in our industry and IT and tech, it makes so much sense. We work better. I think focused work is one of those things I'm desperately always trying to find. And I think that, as larger organizations, I know NetApp is embracing this working remotely right now. I'm not sure what it's like at Red Hat for you, Brian, but I imagine it's similar.
Yeah, we're 100% remote, and to the point, and Red Hat has lots of techies and nerds and so forth. The guy who runs our product engineering, a guy named Matt Hicks, literally he's got a beautiful background. He has this amazing sort of video setup, and people were like, well, what did you do? And he sent out a 6-page thing about here's how I set up my cameras and here's how I set up my audio and here's how I did lighting, and that turned into 80 or 90 email responses and people going, yeah, I need to take this fairly seriously. So yeah, we're going to see a lot of creativity come out of it.
And a lot of follow-up is, can I expense that ring light that I just bought?
Right.
And I guess it's somebody kind of senior as well. I mean, definitely if I was a day job developer, I imagine I'm loving this, right? Because I get to actually work on things focused. But for people like you and Greg and myself, where it's a people interaction and face-to-face interaction has kind of been our lives, even as technologists. I'm curious how you're handling that aside from staying up 11-hour days doing meetings.
It's I think there's going to be some real basic things. I mean, it's you feel more compelled now to do video as opposed to you might have turned the video off before, which means that you've got to kind of be presentable all the time. You've got to be watching all the time. I mean, there's a certain amount of fatigue that you have being in these video things because it's you feel like you've got to be kind of eyeballing everybody, keeping your eyes on everything, looking presentable, doing these things. We're going to have different things that people will feel are stressful. Like when we moved from, you could work remote and so forth, it was like, oh, I don't feel like there's an end to the day. This is going to be like, I don't feel like there's ever an end to like video conferences, or I don't feel like there's ever an end to certain things. So yeah, that's the downside of having the flexibility. And we'll see if people come up with creative ways to deal with that.
And I think there's going to be some burnout when it comes to virtual conferences, when it comes to webinars, when it comes to even the routine conference calls over video. And it's going to be, like you said, Brian, it's going to be interesting to see the creativity that comes out of that. because I think we're going through this gold rush period where everybody is looking to the best ways to adapt to video.
Right.
I think we're going to eclipse that with other means of communication, and maybe it goes back to, hopefully not, but maybe it goes back to traditional blogs and more text-based content. But I'm just curious, Brian. We talk about kind of the underlying technologies that enable a remote workforce, and I think I hate the term VDI. It's just kind of an industry joke. We talk every year is the year for VDI. I almost suspect that this is less about the year of VDI and more about the year of remote workspaces. Because I think if you haven't adopted a VDI strategy yet, there's a long tail to that adoption and getting it rolled out. And it's not something you can flip a switch on like you can with virtual workspaces. Do you see the advent of these workspaces picking up steam here, or is it, as things ease off, the interest in it will kind of dip down? What's the future for remote workspaces?
Well, I'll steal a line from a friend of mine, Andrew Clay Schaefer, who just recently came over to work at Red Hat, and he said, "Look, for all the technology buzzwords and digital transformations and so forth, he said, the greatest mechanism to get somebody to do stuff is to have a crisis or a business challenge. I mean, this is, VDI is great. We've all been around it. There's a reason we joked about it for 10 years, but we also didn't have a reason to have 100% of the workforce remote before. And now, even if we get back to being 40%, 30%, whatever, it's a distinct difference. And it will force a lot of people to say, hey, maybe we need to go look at that thing. And oh, by the way, the new stuff that's out there, whether it's, the acquisition that NetApp just made or something else that's out there, like they're distinctly different than the old stuff we used to do 10 years ago, where it was just worried about, disk IOPS or something like that. So yeah, I think it's gonna force a lot of people to think about it, not in a techie way, but in a real business way. And I think it'll drive a lot of demand.
Yep, I think you're right there. Well, before you wrap up, Brian, real quick, you've got the Cloudcast podcast.
Yep.
Any light you can shine, or any kind of insider information you can share about upcoming episodes?
We've been doing a lot less. So we would always typically do a lot of new technology, new startups. I think we found a little bit that people were a little overwhelmed at saying, hey, I'm not taking on any new tech. So we've been doing more and more about kind of SRE and DevOps and stuff that's kind of culture based. How do you enable these things to happen? So we've been doing a little more of those lately. And then since you guys are starting to kick up Kubernetes again, I restarted the PodCTL podcast. I'm trying to do it now in sort of series format. So instead of every week an interview, I'm doing them sort of Netflix binge style. So they're all about 10 minutes. You can and they all kind of build on each other. So trying that format out. We'll see if how it does.
Now, are you doing that by seasons? Awesome. Is there going to be like season 1, season 2?
Right. Yeah, there'll be a murder in there somewhere, and
and tigers, maybe.
Cliffhanger. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, are you gonna get a mullet for this?
Am I gonna what?
Get a mullet, like.
Oh, I already got a mullet,
King.
man. You should see this thing. I've got a mullet that my kids are giving me a hard time about my mullet right now.
All right, you need to bleach that like the Tiger King.
And sing some songs. Yeah. I will subscribe for the PodCTL soundtrack.
What's the famous person? Carol Bassett. Yeah, my kids have the TikTok for that, and they're all into it.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic.
Awesome.
Brian, how can folks stalk you online?
Best way is probably Twitter. So B Gracely at B Gracely on Twitter is probably the best way, and DMs are open. Happy to talk to folks.
Fantastic. And Phoebe, how can people stalk us online and throw barbs at us or pat us on the back?
Absolutely. We are also on Twitter at GYW Podcast, and subscribe to our podcast on any of your favorite podcast apps, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcast.
And on YouTube, look right below here. There's a space to do comments and things. Say hi to Brian. Say hi to Phoebe. You can yell.
Press a like and subscribe. Yep. Yeah. Looking forward to hearing from you all. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening this week. Appreciate it.